I'm going to hit play. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Bethany Webster, and I am so thrilled to welcome you today to our Facebook Live with one of my favorite writers, Layla Saad. Layla is an author, speaker, and teacher, and she's really been blowing up in the world, and she has a book coming out. So it's really exciting to have her here today to talk about one of my favorite topics, and I know Layla mentioned a couple of her favorite topics as well, which is boundaries and self-care. So we're going to dive into this today. We're going to have a kind of a free-flowing conversation, and then we're going to take some of your questions. And I'd love to hear, from you all as well about, what comes up for you about this topic. But before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to really introduce Layla and show her some love. I have been following Layla for a while now. She kind of I feel like, Layla, you're like a game changer. You're a disruptor. You're an amazing writer, first of all. I love your writing.
Thank you.
I really admire what I perceive in you is this kind of luminous integrity, which is something that I look for and, that I aspire to and look for in all the people that I work with and follow and collaborate with. So I just love your work. And Layla really made a splash when she came out with this amazing letter called "I Need to Talk to Spiritual White Women About White Supremacy." This was in August of 2016 after the Charlottesville situation here in the US. And it was like a clarion call to what many of us were feeling about the coaching industry at the time, which was that it was too white. There's too many white liberal spiritual women talking about empowerment, but yet compartmentalizing, that work from what's happening in the world. And so Layla's work really, it went viral. I think it was like hundreds of thousands of shares or something. And Layla really called that out and called all of us into looking at this. So that was back in August of 2017. And she actually, has gone through this amazing evolution. And I feel like, Layla, watching your evolution is so cool because it's like you're modeling for so many of us what self-care is and boundaries, just in the way that you've done that and the way that you've shown up in such a transparent way with that. So powerful work. And I also heard from Layla, she's collaborated with one of my mentors, Catrice Jackson. And I've been working with Catrice for a while now. And Catrice actually had Layla in her recent Follow Black Women conference. And they also did a number of great talks. It was last summer, I think, where it was like it was like talking about racism to white women. And those were powerful. I think you guys did 2 of those. And now what's going on is Layla is launching a brand new podcast. She had a podcast called the Wild Mystic Woman podcast. And now she has a new one coming out as well. But before I go into that, I just want to read, if it's okay with you, Layla, I want to just read a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure.
So Layla's work is driven by a powerful desire to become a good ancestor, to live and work in ways that leave a legacy of healing and liberation for those who come after she is gone. And that really resonates with me, especially this work of healing the mother wound, right? Which is all about changing these intergenerational patterns for women of the future. Layla's work centers around her experience as a person who is Black, Muslim, and a woman. Through her writings, talks, and curated conversations, Layla is unapologetically confronting the oppressive systems of white supremacy and patriarchy, while offering important teachings and tools for transforming consciousness, cultivating personal anti-racism practice, and taking responsibility for our individual and collective healing. Her work has helped thousands of people face and work to dismantle their internalized racism, and has simultaneously, I love this phrase, created industry-wide paradigm shifts in the spirituality, wellness, and personal growth communities. So thank you so much for being here, Layla. It's really an honor to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Bethany. I'm really excited to be here. And like I was saying to you just before we jumped on the call, your work has been a really important part of my healing journey, my personal healing journey. So I'm really happy to be here. Yeah.
It's great to hear that. I'm so happy to hear that you found me and that you found some of the writing supportive to you. That's
Oh,
always
yeah.
awesome to hear.
Yeah, so I think I found your work back in 2016, so 2 years ago.
Mhm. Yep.
Um, and I was going through a very big period of personal growth and discovered for the first time that I had this thing called a mother wound. And I was brought to your website and I devoured everything. I read every article multiple times. I shared it, I shared your website with as many people as I could. And you gave me the language and the understanding to work through something that was just a really core wound of who I was. So
Mm.
I just want to say thank you to you for your work and for the effect that it's had on me, because I know a big part of why I'm here now doing the work the way that I'm able to do it is because of the work that I did in healing the mother wound. And I had your words to guide me with that. So thank you so much.
Oh my God, that's so cool to hear because I have such admiration for you. So that's awesome. And I love that the work that you did around that issue to you feels directly instrumental in how like you're able to show up in your power.
Absolutely. And every time I hit a new level, that
Mm-hmm.
core wound shows up again, right? That mother wound shows back up again. And so I go right back to your website and remind myself, like, oh, yes, this is what's going on right now. Okay.
Oh my God, that's so cool. And I feel the same way. Like every time I go to a new level of healing, right? It's like we hit the turbulence
Yeah.
at what I call the maternal horizon. It's like where
I
our
love
mothers have never been before, and we're
it.
like pushing those edges. And for me, part of that work is doing the anti-racism work, dismantling my white supremacy. And that is the work that my mother and grandmothers did not do. And so
Right.
I really see that as totally linked with healing the mother wound, that, we all have this as white women, we especially have this inheritance of oppression, that we not only are oppressed by sexism, but we also are oppressors through, to women of color, because we have that privilege, that skin-based, unearned privilege.
Right.
So I love kind of how our work kind of goes like this. It's very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about boundaries and self-care. And I love these topics, and they're so important right now around the holidays when, right, there's all these obligations and pressures of how we show up in our families and in the world. And I know like the self-care topic is kind of diluted. I actually don't really love that word anymore, self-care. It's just so overdone. But there's so much to this, especially as women, that we're taught that we're not good enough, that we're less than. That's just the general message. So it's hard for us to give to ourselves. And often our mothers modeled that same, like, striving, struggling, depletion. We saw our mothers struggle under cultural, oppression. And whether that it was skin-based or just being a woman or both, it's compounded for women of color. So it's hard for us to really do it and push into those edges. And there's so much that comes up with that. So I wanted to hear from you, Layla, about what has worked for you and what, like, your journey kind of with it. Because I know I definitely have evolved and I'm in a different place now than I was a couple of years ago. But I'd love to hear from you on like, what's been your evolution around this issue of self-care and boundaries?
There's definitely been many like key moments of discovering things that helped me to kind of refine this. So the first one that's coming to mind is actually I used to work a corporate job. I used to work in corporate tax. We used to work in these open plan offices, and it would just be so draining for me, and I didn't know why. And that was, around the time that I discovered about introversion. So when Susan Cain's book came out, Quiet Empowerment, and I found Elaine Aron's books on the highly sensitive person and devoured those books, realized that was what was going on for me. And because up until that point, I had just seen myself as just not having the same capacity as other people. And so it
Mm.
felt like a weakness that I wasn't, if we were doing too many things, it was hard for me. You know, I would have to like find somewhere else in the office and go hide and go do my work like in a meeting room somewhere, because I couldn't handle everyone talking all the time. And so,
Totally.
right. And so being empowered with the language to understand, no, you're an introvert. No, you're a highly sensitive person. These are your needs. This is why you're this way. It's not a weakness. It's just a way of being. It's just the way you're wired. That was a big turning point for me to start to prioritize my self-care, because I saw it as, if I can take care of myself the way I need to take care of myself, then I'll have the energy that I need to be able to do what I want to do and not be drained all the time, not be tired all the time, especially as a mother.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So that's kind of where it started for me. And then I have always had, and I think this is something that my father taught me. He taught me that you teach people how to treat you.
Mm.
Right? So if you want people to have respect for your boundaries, you have to teach them these are my boundaries. If you want people to treat you a certain way, you have to show them, you have to make it explicit that these are the ways that you can be in relationship with me, and these are the ways, if you do this is not going to be okay.
Right.
And I have a very transparent mother as well. She's very transparent. So she taught me how to vocalize what I needed and didn't need, right? And so I've always felt that the teachings that I've got from both of them, that it's always much better to be able to say things up front, right?
Mm.
You're in relationship with someone, for them to know up front, look, this is how I am, this is what I need, this is how I need to be in relationship. And so if that's not okay for you, then we don't need to be in relationship. If you
Right.
fundamentally cannot treat me that way, then we don't need to be in relationship. So I had the kind of teachings that way, kind of from my family, to be able to vocalize that and be clear on that. But the biggest turning point for me on boundaries was when I wrote that article that you mentioned. Because at the time I had about 400 subscribers. I wasn't expecting it to go very far. I had a very small, steadily growing business, but very small, very like in my little corner of the internet. Suddenly hundreds of thousands of people in a very short space of time were seeing my writing and were emailing me and messaging me and commenting. And it was like coming at me from every single direction. And I didn't have an assistant. I didn't have a way to filter anything. People could comment, people could email me directly, people could do all kinds of things. And it was one of the most stressful times of my life, because I couldn't open my phone without something. Right.
Wow.
And the reactions to what I had written, some were good and some were not, and some were very violent.
Oh, God.
And so I couldn't even, it got to a point where I could no longer open my email inbox, because every time I opened it, I didn't know what I was going to see. I didn't know what I was going to read. You start reading an email and you think it's like, thank you for the writing. And then it goes into, and this is why you're wrong. And this is why you're a terrible person. And this is why there's something wrong with you. And people would just send me these kind of word vomit emails.
Oh, my God. Oh, God.
And they were long. They weren't like, thank you for, these were long, people wanting to tell me their story so that I would understand that they're not one of those people.
Oh, I get it. Oh, my God.
And, DMs in my, messenger and all kinds of things. And so at first a friend actually said, do you want me to filter your inbox? And I said, please could you? That would be great. I can't deal. And then I found an assistant. And I said, you need to take over this whole thing. And so that began for me out of a necessity, out of need, because it was getting to a point of real triggering. And I don't use that word lightly, but it was like, anytime I would have to go open something, I would get into a panic, And so I was like, I can't do this again. As someone who, I have young children, I need to be in my life.
Yeah.
And I wasn't okay. And so that began for me out of necessity. And then as I began to have conversations with people who had read the writing, and especially with white women who reacted very strongly and very negatively to what I was saying. And I was also at the same time going through my own awakening around race. So although I had written this thing about race, I hadn't, in all this time I had been running my business and not talking about race. And so I didn't even realize the depth of the, white fragility, and how you can be friends with someone, you've had interactions with them, everything's been fine, but you bring up this topic, and it's like they turn into a different person. So I was having my own awakening at the time, and I started to realize I need rules of engagement. I need boundaries that are going to protect me in having these conversations, because every space I was in, I realized every space is white, is predominantly white. And so every space is potentially a place where I risk being racially aggressed. And so I had to have very firm boundaries, written and both just in the way that I behaved, so that to kind of minimize that harm. The interesting thing is that, it's been more than a year now since that time, and I have seen it all basically in this. I've had every kind of thing said to me and every kind of interaction. And so I've built up now a resiliency for being able to have those conversations. I'm not as triggered as I was at the beginning. I've learned to manage my expectations. I've learned not to take it personally and know it's actually not about me, but about them. But I have taught people how to be in relationship with me. So even though I have grown a lot in that time, both personally and in terms of reach, the numbers of people who are seeing my work now is far bigger, but I'm actually getting less of those kind of interactions, because I set things up in such a way that, first of all, I'm very clear with people, this is how you will interact with me and this is how you will not, right? And then secondly, I have physical boundaries in place. Like, you can't message me directly, you can't, send me things directly. It just doesn't come to me. So I don't have to see it. And so I've learned to move differently. And I feel that because of the inner work that I have been doing across this year, I started working with a mentor in February. And I went to her and it felt like I was on my knees. I went to her and said, I'm burnt out. I'm fighting every day with white women, and I can't, it's not sustainable. I can't do this. And she really has been so instrumental in my healing and me learning how to be differently, so that I'm not, so that's not happening anymore, in the same way. And so it's amazing. Now I'm able to focus, I have this workbook coming out. I can devote this time. I'm not battling things all the time, because I said my self-care has to come first. My boundaries have to come first. And if I am to do the work that I'm here to do in the world, it's just not an option not to have these things there,
Wow. Layla, it sounds like you had like a serious crash course in boundaries with that article coming
Serious
out.
one. Yeah. People are like, how did you learn? I'm like, necessity. I had to,
Yeah, that's kind of like one of the benefits of something like going through a really hard time like that. It's like, wow, it makes everything really clear, like what needs to happen. Right. You can't really spend much. I mean, did you have any fears about that? I mean, setting things up and like, okay, I guess I have to do this. I have to, or was it just
I was like, my assistant, Ashley, I was like, Ashley, please just take everything. And I said, I called her my sacred gatekeeper. I was like, you're my sacred gatekeeper. Please. I said, only send me the things that I need to respond to. Only send me positive things, I don't need to see anything else. I just because someone wants to share something with me doesn't mean I need to see it, you know?
Yeah.
And I see that, you know, you were talking about the things that we learn as women. And I think that's one of them, is that this idea that if someone presents something to you, that you have to do something with it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. That need to kind of caretake, and that need to like, it's like, no, I've learned I don't have to actually respond. I actually don't have to respond at all.
That is
And
so liberating. Wow. Thank you for mentioning that. I think that's a really important piece to this sense of obligation, that if someone shares something, if someone's in our space and they offer, that we have to take it. And actually was thinking about this, our talk today, and I wrote down some things that one of the most empowered things for me is that no one's entitled to my time.
Yes.
You know, even if there's someone I love, even if there's someone who wants to share like something that I actually might be interested in or something,
Absolutely.
they're not entitled to show up and dump it. You know,
right.
like it's like you get to decide. And another one was being willing to disappoint other people, right? So like
100%, yeah.
Because people are like, oh, or, you know, I have had these feelings. I don't know if you did, but like something like, oh, are they going to be they're not going to get a response. Are they going to like, is that, they're going to think I don't care? You know,
right.
I've gone through that.
Kinds of things we tell ourselves about it.
Right. So I love how you talked about gatekeeping, making space, and really filtering. I'm hearing like a kind of filter so that you're not just this wide open space that anybody can come in and take or dump or whatever. Like, I think Audre Lorde said in one of her essays, I always think of this around this issue about boundaries. She said something like, women are psychically milked.
Yes.
In our culture.
Yeah, I remember that quote.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of explicit and a little disturbing, but it's like, I think we can all kind of relate to what that feels like, you know, that being sucked on and being exposed in a way that we don't want to be. And I think what your situation models so beautifully, Layla, is that we are in control. We actually do have the power to filter and you know, teach people how to treat us, how we want to be treated. We don't have to be subject to other people, you know, plundering us, you know, whenever they want to, that we actually have a choice. The difference, I think, and I don't know if that you can relate to this, but I think for a lot of women, it's like when we were little girls, we didn't have a way to say no. We couldn't really have boundaries. So there's this confusion that as we're adults that we can't say no, or we're going to be lost or unapproved of if we say no. The little girl in us might still believe that.
Yeah. And I think if we're really honest with ourselves as well, we get something out of it. There's something that we get out of it. For me, I know my biggest fear that I've had to work through for most of my life, and finally this year, I think I finally like cracked it, was my fear was of being called a bitch. That was my biggest fear, was being called a bitch. And having my behavior being called bitchy, you know, you're not responding, she thinks she's better than us, she's all of those kind of things. And so I would allow myself to be psychically milked, basically, right? So that to avoid that. And so I was getting something out of it. And so I had to do, and this is why the mentoring work that I did and the healing work that I did for myself was so important this year, because I had to realize it's not about other people. It begins first with me. It's not just about saying, I'm just going to have a boundary if the reason that I have the reason that I don't have the boundary somehow serves me in some subconscious way. Right. So I had to learn the art of putting myself first. And we're just not taught that. We're just not taught that. And so we're not taught it at all. And then when you become when you get married or have children, it's even more that you come last.
Oh, yeah.
And so I had to literally do this work of learning day by day what it would look like for me to be first, for my needs to be met first, you know, for my core needs to be met first, and then my desires to be met first as well. So not just like, I need this because I'm tired, but I need this because it gives me joy or it gives me pleasure. And so I had to learn how to do that. So my priorities have kind of turned upside down now, where I come first, then my husband and my children, and then everyone else, right? It was kind of the other way around. It was my children, and then my work, and then me. And so, yeah. And so what I've experienced though is that in putting myself first, and I know, I think Oprah and Ian Levin's aunt have talked about this, my cup gets full, and then I give from the overflow. What everyone else gets is the overflow. And actually it makes everyone else happier. Because when I'm with my children now, I'm really with them because I don't feel this kind of underlying resentment that the time I'm spending with them is the time I really wanted for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not resentful towards the people who are getting to read my work because I'm not sacrificing myself. I'm not like buying into this story that I need to do this work in the world and sacrifice myself for the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
I see collective healing beginning with personal healing. And that when I'm able to give from a place where I'm whole, the work, the creative work and the thought leadership that I'm putting out into the world, I have more access to things like compassion, patience, kindness, generosity, innovation, because I'm not empty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to pause for a second because that was just really amazing what you just shared. Yeah, like I'm feeling that like in my belly right now. Like what you encapsulated there was this total revolution of how we think about, a total transformation of how we live in the world as women. And I love how you made that distinction between like your core needs and your desires, and that you need both. We need both. We can't just like, and this is something I've been thinking about lately too. It's like, we need to give ourselves more than enough. I think even in the self-care discussion, it's just like getting enough to like get by, like just enough to get ourselves over to the next day or something, or to the next week. But what you're talking about is much more radical, which is like your core desires. I'm imagining like eating well, sleeping good, taking care of your physical needs, your emotional needs. And then the desires are like, what do you want? Your preferences, so that they can all be in place. And then you're really operating on all four cylinders, right? You're really on fire.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And so what you have access to, what I have found is what I have access to when I'm operating with all four cylinders full is so much bigger. I feel expanded. I have access to more. And so it deepens in it. I'm not operating out of survivor mode. Now I also want to preface this by also saying I have privileges that allow me to be able to do that work, right? So I have the financial privilege to be able to afford to work with a mentor. I know that my home life and everything is secure. That is important as well. And I think that's an important part of my work around anti-racism is also making it so that Black women and women of color have more of that available to them.
Right.
Because they don't, right? They don't. As women all together, we're all struggling, but especially women who are in marginalized identities, it's even less accessible. And so I see it as a great privilege that I have been able to do this work, and to model what it looks like now to walk and to live where I know how to put myself first. But I also recognize that it is a privilege itself that I was even able to do that,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something I think for, those of us who are white women or who are economically more privileged, it's easy to forget that, right? We're just like, oh, it's just focused on me and like what I need. And it's easy to forget that, holy shit, this is amazing. We forget what the privilege we have, and it's easy to forget that. So it's important to, I think, especially right now where we are in the world and with what's happening collectively, for white women to really own that, like really own where we're at with our privilege, the economic, the spiritual, access to like higher needs like mentorship or coaches or advisors that a lot of other women don't have, and help other women, like lift up other women, use some of our resources to do that. Because it's not, I just want to bring up something you said in one of your essays that it kind of resonates with what we're talking about right now. You said, the goddess isn't here just for the liberation of all white women. The goddess is here for the liberation of all. Mm-hmm. So if, as white women aren't doing anything to support other Black women, we're not part of the change. And so this has to be part of it. It absolutely does. And I would even argue that for white women, doing our anti-racism work it must be in our self-care. I think it is self-care because it's about restoring our humanity. So it's not about, it's not about feeling good.
No.
It's not about being the center.
It's not about rescuing anyone.
Yes, exactly. It's not about being the center and saying, oh, here I am to do racism work. Let me center myself. It's like, no, this is like quiet work that we do within ourselves about our integrity and restoring the humanity that we lost by being called white and what that means. Right. So I just want to speak that to the white women that are listening, that I have lots of recommendations around anti-racism work, and I'll share that with you another time in the group. But I see this as situated deeply into what our identities have to be as conscious white women right now. If we're serious and if we want to be in integrity, we got to situate this at the center. So thank you for mentioning that, Layla, about, this point of difference for many of us around self-care. And it's not talked about enough. No. It's just not talked about enough around this topic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I was describing kind of my journey over the last year and a half, I guess now, I was in battle mode for a lot of it, right? And things like pleasure, joy, they were like off in the distance. I couldn't even imagine accessing that. And I don't live in the Western world. I live in the Middle East. And I've often thought about, wow, what if it wasn't just me experiencing this virtually in my work, but also in my day-to-day living, the toll that it takes. I visited the US earlier this year. I spoke at a conference, and it was my first time coming to the US as an adult. I'd come as a child.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
My first time as an adult. And I came home, and it took me a good month to recover, like spiritually, mentally, because I felt the toll of my race when I was there, which I don't feel when I'm here. Wow. And so again, it's understanding we all deserve our humanity, and we all deserve to experience wholeness. And some of us are having more access to that than others. And so to be aware of that, one of the big things that was a part of my journey this year was anger. Right. And having the trope of the angry Black women being projected onto me. And I was angry, I was definitely angry, And so when you are just in anger and you're not getting support to be able to work with that, and also to be able to access other parts of yourself, again, it's hard to even think about consistent joy or pleasure.
Right.
And so that's why boundaries are so important. You talked about, at the beginning, you were saying about self-care and the term of self-care being really overused, but the term of self-care was created by Audre Lorde, and it was a political stance. She was saying, my self-care is my right, it's my resistance. She was a Black lesbian woman. She had biracial children, and so she had a lot that was coming at her, and she saw self-care and coined this term of self-care as a point of resistance. Of her, the way that I see it is her saying, despite this machine that's trying to grind me to a pulp, I matter.
Yeah.
And I'm going to live my life as if I matter. And I'm not going to allow the system to define for me how I will be treated, and what I will allow myself to accept because of my identities. And that's meant a lot to me, because again, I'm Black and Muslim and woman, and there are so many ideologies in the world, right, that say to be Black and Muslim and woman are like having 3 strikes against you.
Right.
And so my joy and my pleasure, I used to say my joy and my pleasure are my resistance, but I've actually stopped using that language because I don't want my joy to be a place of war.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I see it as my joy and my pleasure are my right. Self-care is my right. And I just try to operate from that place.
Oh, I love that. And thank you for mentioning Audrey. I didn't realize that was her term. Now I'm like, I can really stand behind it. I didn't know that was, I'm going to go back and read now and find that essay.
It's very whitewashed since then, but
that's probably, yeah, as happens.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I love that you mentioned that, because this is kind of what I teach in the mother wound work with women, is that we have to like do this. We have to do these practices, even though the wider culture is saying you're bad, or you're selfish, or, who do you think you are for doing this? And putting yourself first before other people. We have to live these new ways into being, right? Like, no one's going to say, okay, now women can, take care of themselves. Like, we have to this is how intergenerational change works. We literally change our daily lives. So everything and I love, this is what you said earlier, which is beautiful, that collective change happens first in the individual. And so all of you that are here watching today are part of this, each of us doing enough of our good work, taking care of ourselves, healing these intergenerational wounds, healing our internalized racism. We are the ones that are changing. We're like cells in a body that are like mutating into a more highly evolved state. So even those things that we do in the most private moments, that they matter. They matter so much. And we live in this world that glamorizes, public life and being, in the view of others, and the white male gaze and the collective gaze. But a lot of these choices take place, really privately. And they're between us and our integrity, and our love for ourselves and for our, our children and our families. So I love, yeah. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, I also think about it scientifically as well, in terms of wiring a new pattern in the brain, right? So when I first started working with my mentor, and I was like, I'm so worn out, I'm so burnt out, she was like, you're not gonna get into any internet fights for the next 30 days, and your only goal is to have a 30-day pleasure practice. And I was like, what do you mean? First of all, I don't even know what gives me pleasure. Secondly, I thought everything else was more important, and this was something frivolous. And so I would do, say, 7 days, and then I would fall off for a few days, and we would get back to our next mentoring session, and she'd say, I noticed that you stopped posting. She'd make me post it. I noticed that you've stopped posting about it. What happened? And I would tell her, and she says, you have to go back to day 1. And she'd make me start again.
Whoa.
And so I went a number of times, because I was so resistant to it. But I was then able to wire it into my brain, just having to do it again and again and again, where it came to the point of I didn't have to consciously think, oh, I've got to tick that box today, but rather it became like I was looking for opportunities to find pleasure in just whatever I was doing, so that it became a way of life. And so when you were talking about that intergenerational healing, a lot of it is also just scientifically having to rewire the brain and wire new connections and ways of being, so that it doesn't feel false. It doesn't feel like an act, but it feels like a natural way of being. And a lot of my mother wound work has has been brought about also by the work that I'm doing in the world, but also because I have a daughter. So I have, my first child is a girl. So I'm a daughter of a mother and a mother of a daughter. And my daughter is very much like me. And so in her, I see her growing up and I'm like, oh, I remember that stage and I remember this stage. And she looks a lot like me when I was young as well.
Oh, wow.
And so I noticed myself go to react to certain things that she does in exactly the same way that my mother would react to me, and me thinking I'm never going to do that and then doing it. Right. And so it came to a point where I just said, I can't do this. I have to write a new story. I have to do this differently so that we're not just repeating the same pattern again. So a lot of my dedication to that rewiring and being in these new ways is so that she can see me being different than what I saw. And so then she gets a different message and she gets more possibilities of ways that she can be in the world and things that she can expect, and ways that she can hold herself. And so I see it as a great privilege to be the one who says, that was the pattern before. Now I'm going to be the one to do things differently so the pattern afterwards can be different, you know. And I know all the things that I have, that I will just be able to stop it and be the one, right? but, you know, I'll be different, so she'll be different, so whoever comes after her will be different. And we change it that way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I think that's such a beautiful illustration of really how it works, you know, and I'm hearing that your daughter in many ways is like a catalyst for you, you know, like I'm going to step into my fullest self because she needs to see a woman in her power so that she can be a woman in her power.
Yes.
And, I almost see it in my mind, like it's a matrix of like past, present, future women in the same line. Everything is changing and evolving with every step that you take that's empowered and that's for yourself, putting yourself first. It's like every tiny little step, it matters because your daughter is taking that in. Her brain, it's involved in how her brain is being wired and, you know, her beliefs about herself. It's just like this moment to moment evolution that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it sounds like your self-care practices are what's helping you to show up that way consistently.
Yes. And so again, though, with the understanding, like with the internal understanding that I have that I'm not doing my self-care for her. I'm doing it.
Good distinction.
Yeah.
It's an easy one to fall into, isn't it?
Yeah. For me first. And again, it's like, it's so hard to, because of the way we're trained and conditioned, it's so hard to like convince ourselves almost that no, you just get to fill yourself up. You don't need a reason for it. You don't need justification for it. That doesn't need to be something that's happening and that's why you're doing it.
Right.
You get to do it because you get to live daily like that. And that's better for you and it's better for everyone else. And so, it's been quite a journey for me learning how to do that.
Oh, Layla, it's so cool to hear you talk about this because you've just transformed so much, and you've used you're illustrating so many of these amazing like practices. I want to mention one more thing, and then I want to go to see if there's a question or two from people in the group because I know we've got a lot of people watching. I just wanted to mention, and I think this is what you were actually just saying, it's about guilt. You know, there's a part of us that feels guilty when we were, oh my God, can I be that happy? Can I feel that good all the time? Just because, like, can I really do that? And one of the things I like to say is, you know, feel the guilt and do it anyway. You know, because the guilt is going to be there. It's an artifact of our conditioning in a patriarchy, a white supremacist patriarchy. It's going to say, who the hell are you? Who do you think you are? And we just have to say, oh, there's that voice again, but I'm going to go forward. You know, I'm going to continue to take good care of myself, radically. So, and after a while, that guilt voice kind of matters less and less.
Right. You know, one of the things that my mentor really helped me with this year, when you asked the question, who do you think you are? And so I brought this to one of our sessions, and I said, I'm scared that people are going to say to me, who does she think she is? And so my mentor turned it around to me and she said, who do you think you are? And I was kind of stumped. And so she said, this is your homework. You need to journal and figure out, who are you to you? And I spent months with that. Who am I to me? Who am I to me? And not the roles, not the things that I do out in the world, not that I'm a writer or I'm a this or I'm a that, I'm a mother. No, who am I to me? And that is actually a question that I continue to evolve with. I feel like it's like a question that's going to be constantly with me, because in the times when those questions from other people come up, because they do, people are going to project all kinds of things at you. You need to be able to be clear on who you are to yourself first, so that when those questions come, you know how to deal with them within yourself. It's not that you need to give them an answer and justify, this is who I am and this is why I'm allowed to do what I'm doing, right? It's who are you in your relationship with yourself? Because when your relationship with yourself is a friendly one, a strong one, a safe one, then what is happening outside of you has far less of an impact, both like the positive praise and the negative criticism as well, right? To be able to be solid in yourself means doing the work to figure out, who are you to yourself? When you're not trying to prove anything, when you're not trying to defend anything, when you're not trying to project something, who are you to yourself? And so I continue to sit with that, because I find that it doesn't matter what anyone else is saying, right? And it can be very tempting. I think, we talked about how my work has grown over this period. It could be, if I didn't have boundaries and if I wasn't prioritizing my relationship with myself, every day would be a new adventure, because it would be, oh, today these people are saying nice things about me. Oh, tomorrow these people are saying bad things about me. And so I'm just like this leaf being thrown about in the wind, right?
Whoa.
I have no solid grounding. And so the bigger that my reach has gotten, the more tight my kind of relationship with myself is, in my inner circle, and kind of just prioritizing what is most important. Don't get distracted by whatever is going on outside of you. What is most important to you? Who are you to you? What do you need for you to be comfortable, for you to thrive, for you to be what you need to be? Never mind what anyone else thinks or needs.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you so much for bringing that question, sharing that with us about that interaction with your mentor, because I think that's an amazing question to sit with. And it makes everything clearer too, doesn't it? When you know who you are to you, you can feel whether something's like congruent or whether it's incongruent, and it's clearer.
Right. And in our last session, she said something and it hit me like a thunderbolt, because we were talking about what because I continue to work with her. I think it's so important that if you're doing healing work out in the world, that you're taking care of yourself as well.
Oh, 100%.
So important. And so the kind of homework she gave me for this time was kind of creating a kind of personal constitution. What are the rules? What are the guidelines of being me? And so she said to me, one of your most important rules needs to be, I will never self-betray. And that hit me like a thunderbolt, because I think we do that without even thinking. We self-betray in all kinds of big and small ways. We self-betray when we say, no, it's okay. I don't have something to do. I can do what you're asking me to do. No, it's okay. I can take care of your needs above my needs. And so making this commitment to ourselves, it doesn't have to be the big self-betrayal. It's the tiny self-betrayal, the daily ones that don't seem like a big deal, but are slowly chipping away at you. Those are the
Totally.
yeah.
Absolutely. Those are totally huge. And especially around the holidays, I think too, like, I think one of the mindsets I posted was like, I will not abandon myself no matter what's going on,
Yes.
won't abandon or betray myself. And that's a good question, I think, for us to sit with in the group even. Layla, thanks for bringing that forward. So like, what ways am I betraying myself, or what ways do I abandon myself? The little ways that, like, oh, I had this plan for myself all day, but oh, now you need something. Okay. So we give
Right.
ourselves away. And God, that's such a strong message we give to ourselves about our value, about how important we are, about, putting other people above us. And for a lot of us, we've seen our mothers do that, and we're replaying that same thing. So, I think it's those little things that actually have a lot of power, because if we can change those little things, we can really step into something huge, right?
And notice how stressful it is when we try to change just a little thing and we realize it's actually not a little thing. Just saying, no, I actually don't have time for that, becomes like this really stressful thing because we're not used to saying no.
Right.
So it looks little, but it's actually not little.
Yeah. So, it's like a muscle. We have to build it up over time, through practice and using it, in the little ways and the big ways, and daily, having a practice around it. We talk about inner mothering work in the work that I do, and like taking care of that little girl inside of us. And that's part of it, that little girl that might think, oh, I'm going to be abandoned, or they're not going to like me if I don't answer emails within 24 hours, or, whatever it is. Helping that little girl feel safe so that you can show up as the amazing woman that you are.
Right.
So Layla, I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours. This is just so much fun. I love this topic, but I want to respect your time. And I know the time is going away, and maybe just get a couple questions. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yes, absolutely. I'm here.
All right, cool. So I'm going to head over to the Facebook group. Hey, everybody. How are you? Oh, good. We've got a lot of comments as well. Cool. So here's a question from Haley. So she says, I love this. You teach people how to respect you, what your dad had taught you, Layla. She says, I love this. Can you share a few specific examples of words used in relationship to others, of how you set the boundaries in your life? I feel clumsy having this conversation. A fear of being selfish and disappointing others, but I'm learning. Thank you. So that was Haley. So I guess she's asking for some examples of how you teach people to respect you, specifically around having the conversation.
So I think before you actually have the conversation, I think it's really important to be clear, first of all, what you want, right? So
right.
So I'm going to give you an example. And my example is from a perspective of someone who's an entrepreneur, and who's, I used to coach, and I also had the podcast, as you said, and I had my calendar. I had all these times that people could book in. You could book in whenever.
Oh, wow.
Whenever. You could book in whenever, right? And so it was very stressful. Right?
Oh, I can imagine. Wow.
Yes. Yeah, it was a lot going on, right? And so one of the things that I decided to do was to decide for myself first which days I wanted to have coaching sessions, which days I wanted to have podcasts, and then set that up, right? So that when you go in to sign up, you only have the days that are available. Right? So I'm using that as an example of, before you're having a conversation with someone about what you will or won't do, you need to be very clear on what you want to do or not do.
Yeah.
Right. And why, for yourself. So for me, it was like, I can't have that happening because I have chaos basically every single week, and I can't have chaos.
Yeah.
Right?
Nope.
And my perspective before that was, oh, well, I have to have as many options as possible, because what if they've got a lot going on in their lives and they have busy schedules, and so let me make myself open, right? And so they can do whatever they want. And so I had to flip it again. This is the day that you can book in, and that's the only day. And if that timing doesn't work, check next week or the week after, and we can adjust it slightly. But in general, that's when it's going to be. And so that for me doesn't feel like I need to prove anything or I need to combat anything. It's just, this is what I need for things to run and work smoothly in my life. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what you're saying too, is you're giving people choices, Layla. So it's not like you're closing the door and saying, well, this is it or never, but like
right.
you're actually giving them choices, but the choices you're giving them are all choices that work for you.
Right. Right. Exactly. So you need to figure out what are the choices that work for you before you go into that conversation. And if you don't know, if it comes at you, someone's asked you something in the moment, say, I'll get back to you. You don't, this goes back to that whole, we don't need to caretake everyone's needs immediately just because they brought something to us. Right. And we don't often give ourselves the gap of space and time. And so we can't actually access, you can't access like something bigger. You're operating in survivor mode. So you're thinking of immediate concerns and you're thinking of them a lot of the times and not yourself. And so give yourself space. Say, I'll get back to you. And then figure out what you need. And then you present, these are the choices you have. Yeah.
Yes. I love that. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah. We were getting good at saying like, I'll get back to you. I don't know at the moment. I'm not sure. I'll let you know when I find out. Like that's a way of demonstrating to yourself as well that you're worth the time it takes and that you're worth getting your needs met, that you're not going to lose something from being good to yourself. Yeah.
And I found another thing that really works well for me as well is tuning into my body. And so when something is presented to me, an opportunity or someone asks a question and they need something, is tuning in and feeling for, is this a hell yes or a hell no? And in fact, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no.
Yeah.
It's not a maybe, it's still a hell no. Do you know what I mean?
Oh my God, Layla, you have to put that in your book or something. If it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no.
It already is, because it's, again, the way that I see it and the way that I think of it, my time is very precious. Not because I'm so self-important, but because all of our time is precious.
Yes.
I need the time to do the things that I want to do. I need the time for my family. And so I can't just be saying yes to something just because someone presents it to me. And I used to say yes if I knew, well, I can just do that quickly, or that's easy for me to do, or I have some interest in that, so I'm sure I'll be able to do that, or, those kind of reasonings. And now, again, time is really of the essence for me. And if it's just not a hell yes, I want to be a part of this, so you sent me an email to ask me to be a part of this, and it was an immediate hell yes,
Cool.
And so, and so anything else is just no, and it doesn't need to be over explained. That's just not what I'm wanting right now.
And all that energy gets available to you, like from all the mediocre, you have all this extra time and you can feel better. You can take care of yourself for all the things that really matter to you.
Right. And what Haley was saying about that thing that my dad said to me, you teach people how to treat you. I also see that as just being in respectful relationships with people. Like if I'm in a relationship with someone, I really value them being transparent with me, because then I know where I stand.
Right.
And if they're saying yes, but they don't really want to be there, I don't want that for them.
Right.
Right. And I don't really want to be in that experience with them. So the way that I approach it is, it's not mean to say no. It's just the truth. And hopefully they will find someone else who it will be a hell yes for. But it isn't me. And so I send them love, and I know that they send me love, and we can both move on and, with our paths.
Right. Exactly. I love that. I like to say that too. Like boundaries it's about respect. You're respecting the other person when you say no from an honest place. And, they can get their needs met in other ways. Just like, you free that person up to get what they need as well, to find that. Fabulous. Fabulous. Okay. Let's do one more question. I know we're running out of time here. Someone else had a good question. I'm having a hard time, scrolling them. Someone asked a question about your, about your, kind of like your constitution, like your mentor had said, create a rules of engagement with other people, things that feel good to you. And she was wondering if you had any examples of that. Like, how did you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm still actively working on mine. But one of the important things that needs to be on there is, what are your non-negotiables?
Mm-hmm.
So in order for you to be, to have your needs met and to have your, well, let's say a non-negotiable is your needs, right?
Okay. Right.
Absolutely, I must have this or I must not have this. So a non-negotiable for me is that I don't like to be in relationships with people who are not transparent. Telling the truth is a really core need of mine.
Yeah.
I think it's the Sagittarian in me. It's like it kills me when someone isn't being truthful. And so that is a non-negotiable to me. If you lie to me, we're in relationship and you tell me a lie, that's just a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Right? And we're talking about like little white lies. You knowingly lie to me. That's going to be a non-negotiable for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that those are the things that I'm thinking about. And again, it begins with, what are the personal constitution is first about me and my relationship with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then me and my relationship with other people.
Right.
And so if we talk about the me and my relationship with myself, like to be me, to be who I am, and for me to feel comfortable and me to feel whole, I need to be, I need to have freedom of creative expression.
Right.
When I don't feel like I can fully show up as myself, I feel like a part of me has died.
Yeah.
Right. And so corporate living was very hard for me.
Oh man, it must have been really hard.
It
Yeah.
was very, very hard for me because my core need wasn't being met. Right. And so thinking about, in order for me, knowing who I am, knowing my relationship with myself, and having done the self-awareness work that I'm doing and continue to do, what do I need for me? And then what do I need in my relationships with other people? And then being very clear on that, right? And so being able to, when something comes from the external world to you, knowing how you're going to handle it. Oh, this is my constitution. This is how I said I would handle things.
Yeah, I love how you said start with the non-negotiables as well, because then that makes it kind of clear, right? It kind of like takes a bunch of stuff off the table, and then you can focus on, what you move towards, after you kind of look at what's a definite no, and then what's left over, you can play with that as well.
Right. You kind of think of, Maslow's hierarchy, right? With the basic.
Yeah.
So what are those? And then we, again, deserve to thrive. So we're wanting to move towards wholeness. We want to move towards vibrating higher and really being in that full self. What do I need in place for that to be so? In my self, with my family, with my friends, in my work, what are those things? And just being very clear on them.
Awesome. And Layla, how did you find, I have a woman of color in the comments asking how you found your mentor. If you have any tips for women of color looking for a
mentor to everyone.
Oh, great.
I would highly recommend my mentor. I do. Her name is Frantonia Pollins, and she's amazing.
Okay.
The reason that I found her, funnily enough, we were in a group where a big blow up happened, and some harm was done by a white woman to a group of women of color, myself included. And so we all hopped on this group call, and that's where I first met her. And she just had this energy of, I was like, I want that. She seems completely in herself.
Awesome.
Just completely like sovereign, self-owned. And I was like, I need that. And so we started working together months afterwards. But I would highly recommend her. Her name is Frantonia Pollins. And I think, although I'm not sure, I know she was offering like a special deal at the minute with like 80% off for a session.
Cool.
Check her Instagram. It's Dr. Frantonia Pollins. But
how do you spell her last name?
Pollins.
Okay, Frantonia Pollins. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for recommending her.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. She sounds wonderful.
She is. She's not for everyone, but for the people she's for, she's really for me. So I highly recommend.
Fabulous, fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Layla. We've had such a full hour together and you've shared so much wisdom with us. On behalf of my entire community, I want to thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And I'm so excited for you and your continued evolution. I know you have a book coming out. Can you tell us when that's coming out and where we can find it?
Yes. So what's the date now? So I am aiming for, and I've been crossing all my fingers and toes that it will come out on my birthday this month.
Yay!
I actually haven't announced that, but you asked, so I thought I would share. My birthday is on the 24th of November. And so that's the date we're aiming for, if we can get all the pieces in place at that time. And so it's actually a free workbook. It's called the Me and White Supremacy Workbook. If you'd like to pay, you can donate, but it is actually available for free. And it's a 28-day process for people who hold white privilege to examine their internalized racism and to examine their complicity in the system of white supremacy. And it was based on a challenge that I ran earlier in the summer that had thousands of people participating. It was really life-changing for a lot of people. So I highly recommend it. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll get you'll see when it's available. Yeah.
Fabulous, fabulous. So everybody, after we close the call, if you're not already following Layla, please go to Instagram, follow her. Also check out her website and follow her on Patreon as well. There's a lot of ways to follow her work. And I'm so excited. The book is actually coming out now. So later in the month, hopefully. And so will it be on your website? Is that how we can purchase it?
It's going to be on its own website.
Okay.
Have some resources that go along with it. That's what I was working on.
Oh, that's what you're working on today. Yes. Oh my God, how exciting. And so it's a free book, but I encourage you to donate to Layla, so that this book can get out to as many people as possible. Tell your friends and follow Layla's work. You're on the rise. You're such a rock star. And I so appreciate you, and the way you live and move in the world is such an inspiration to so many of us. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody.
Yay. And Layla, let me know how I can support you in any way. I'm here for you.
Thank you, Bethany. I really appreciate that.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. And I'll see you back in the group. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye.